What is up, friends? Welcome to episode 63 of Into the Necrosphere. I am joined today by the beastly Sam Bean of the ANTICHRIST IMPERIUM, Werewolves. He was also with the Berserker and the Senseless. If you have followed the show for any period of time, you know that I'm a huge fan of the man's musical endeavors, as well as his vocal stylings. But turns out he's a pretty cool dude as well. We started this discussion talking about caveman death metal and probably bemoaning the new school of death metal like two grumpy old men, and then the conversation actually evolved from there into growing older. We spoke about geopolitics, current affairs, just a whole bunch of stuff. It's a very meaty 2 hours long. I am presenting it to you virtually unedited. And I really hope you guys are going to enjoy this. I think from my perspective, this is probably about as close to fulfilling the vision of this podcast, that I had when I started, that I've ever gotten to. So I loved it. Sam is definitely going to be back. I just hope you guys feel as strongly about it as I do. Speaking of feeling strongly about anything, I'm also going to be doing some reviews after the conversation with Sam. Thundering Hooves out of London has just put out a great debut record that I'm going to talk about. I will also talk about the new Malakhim. Before that, however, there is no demo of the week, but I did want to spotlight a band who recently started following me on Twitter, and sometimes that's enough to get you noticed. They are called Warkvlt out of Indonesia. 4 strapping young bucks who put out their 3rd record in November on Sadist Records. The album is called Death Hymn. This reminds me a little bit of Angel Corpse, and that is a very, very good thing. Here is the opening track off of Death Hymn, a song called Inquisition. That was Inquisition by Warkvlt off a record called Death Hymn. I will post the link to their Bandcamp in the description of this podcast. Like I said, not a demo of the week, but these guys really impressed me, and I might try and get one of them on the show at some point in the not too distant future. Speaking of guests, if you stick around until the very end of the podcast, I will announce next week's guest. It is another big one. I'm not going to give anything away. I will say there's some folks who may potentially thumb their nose at this individual, but frankly speaking, the band that he plays in, if you don't like them, you can suck it. You can also join me on social media. The show is on Instagram and Facebook at Into the Necrosphere, on Twitter at iNecrosphere. If you fancy cladding yourself in the Into the Necrosphere logo, then go to teespring.com and check out the Into the Necrosphere store. There's hoodies, t-shirts, face masks, leggings, all sorts of shit. And I bet it will make you look both stylish, elegant, and also like an absolute badass. What else is there to tell you guys? Not a whole lot beyond that, quite frankly. If you're in a band and you have and you've just recorded your best work, you are yet to be signed, and you want me to feature your demo on the show, at the very least you want me to listen to it and see whether it makes the cut, then send it to me at intothenecrosphere@gmail.com. If I like what I hear, I will feature it on the show. Also, if you are new to the show is available on YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts on. If you like what you hear, or if you like what you see, then please like, comment, share, subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else, and you're able to leave a review and the spirit moves you to do so, then please do that, because it helps me get guests, and it just helps the show grow. Once again, thank you very, very much to anyone who has done that so far. Thanks to the great response that I got from all of you for the episode I did with John Jarvis of Scour last week. And on that note, let's hope that I get similar applause for what's about to come. This is Sam Bean of Werewolves and the Antichrist Imperium. So we were just talking before I started recording, and you were saying that you're going to be recording another clip for Werewolves. What song are you recording a clip for?
I was going to say, if this podcast is coming out after the end of January, I can tell you, it's for Sublime Wartime Voyeurism. So that's the second song on the new album.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of an interesting one. We've just not only gotten the hang of just squeezing out album after album, but now we're in the habit of squeezing out film clip after film clip as well. So yeah, we're just kind of like riding a little bit of a get stuff done streak.
Yeah. Have you been surprised by the response to The Dead Are Screaming? Because I remember when Matt first spoke to me about that album, and I got a sneak preview of what it sounded like, and I loved it. But, it was so fucking brutal and relentless and uncompromising. And I feel like you guys, in a weird way, the more you seemed to lean into the, almost sort of Neanderthal blueprint that you'd set for the band, the more people just seemed to love it.
Yeah, that is really weird. Like, we are surprised. I'm definitely surprised. The main reason for that is I got a few different points of comparison, but one of them would have to be, I do this solo project called the Senseless, and that's something I put a lot of work into and years of effort, and really strain my brain over and try and come up with like the most quality stuff I can. And whenever I release it, it's just like pitching pennies off a cliff. It's, and that's cool. That's the way it goes. I'm just like happy to bang something out. That's totally me. But to be able to do something like Werewolves, where we really honestly just fucking wank it out.
Yeah.
And half laughing, half dribbling, and to then have the response be what it's been. It's just like, of course, it's the album that we've put the least amount of effort into, that everyone seems to be the most interested in. That's the way it goes. I don't dislike it for that. It's just hilarious.
Yeah. And the thing for me, and I said this when I've said this every time I've spoken about the album. I think what I love about it is it kind of captures the best of what Matt does as a just a riff beast, and in my opinion, one of the most underrated riff beasts on the planet. It captures
Absolutely, yeah.
what I mean. Dave Haley is a monster on the drums, and you're an incredible vocalist, and it seems like
It is.
you're almost kind of throwing that into this engine that then spits out these songs in a very spontaneous fashion, and it's almost like the talent combined with the spontaneity is what creates that magic.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, like, we make a big show of like not putting effort into it, but like after 20 years, you kind of want to hope that you're good at something.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of those 20 years just sort of doing those. In fact, you know the history between Matt and myself, like originally working with Berserk, we sort of like burst out of the gates, like on the brutality scale, kind of with that. And some bands mellow with age or chill out with age, and that's not necessarily true for everyone. I don't think that's true for us. So you've got a couple of decades each of just, being brutal as fuck when it comes to music or making stuff. And yeah, the spontaneity thing, I think it's really weird. We've never, I don't think any of us have really done like a spontaneous sort of music project before. And death metal is like, it's not the kind of music that you can jam. It's not the kind of music where you all sit around and like punch some cones and, just like kind of riff off each other and hey presto a song. Because of the tempos and the complexity involved, it's usually a very deliberate thing. It's quite often just one person sort of writing it all and feeding it out. And I guess because of that, it does lose a lot of feeling. It loses a lot of emotion, or that mysterious like ingredient X that like a lot of other music does have, because it's more open to people just being able to like sit down and use their musical connection between each other to do something. Death metal doesn't lend itself to that. So we're fortunately, I think, at a stage where we can do that. And we've done it with this project. We honestly didn't think anything would come of it. It was just like a hilarious thing that Matt and Dave wanted to do, and they were like, who's someone we know who's not going to be a problem getting vocals and bass out of, and they got onto me. So, but yeah, I think like it's got something that a lot of modern extreme music lacks, and that is it's got vibe. It's got a vibe to it.
I was just going to say that now. I feel like one of the things that's been lacking in and it's not all modern death metal. There's a lot of modern death metal that's still very good. But I think one of the things that's been lacking from a lot of stuff that's come out over the last decade, probably even more than that, probably 2 decades. Whenever we listen, and I'm sure you're a little bit older than I am, but whenever we listen to stuff like the first Deicide album, that record is so riddled with flaws and so riddled with imperfections, but there's a feeling to it that I fucking love. Like, I just soak up everything on that album every time I listen to it. You listen to Carnage in the Temple of the Damned, or you listen to Mephistopheles, and it's like, there's just something that's awesome about it. And Legion is the same, and so is Once Upon a Cross. And there's like a lot of those old records weren't perfect albums, but they had this particular feel to them. And I feel like a lot of death metal later on has really become kind of overthought. There's it needs to be a particularly aggressive music, in my view. And I feel like when you overthink it, you lose the aggression. You lose
think what it might be, actually, I think what it is, it's a lack of self-awareness. Like, that's what you get from the early death metal bands, and particularly from that first Deicide album. Like, you're not looking at yourself in the mirror too much when you're putting out that much harmonized vocals, or like I still listen to it and like half get off on it and half just go, what the fuck are you guys thinking? And it's also like, it's taken for granted these days, like, how satanic you can get in lyrics, but that just like flew so far across the line. And I think that's a real difference with today. Like, today, And I don't think many people have noticed it, but it's the most self-conscious generation wandering around, and quite,
Yeah.
the ones making death metal or extreme music, pardon me, they're usually your late teens and the ones in the 20s. So we're now talking about your millennial generation getting into it and sort of steering it. Even your 30 somethings, they've grown up like online a lot of the time, and that just breeds that. And they're also kind of like, just still young when the first Big Brother came out, and the concept of that it's legit to just like stare watching each other on a screen for ages. And as a result, like, I think everyone overthinks what they do and who they are and what this says about them and as a person. And I think all of that is just hurdle after hurdle for like your muse to jump over. Like, whereas Deicide and Obituary and guys like that, like, just had this empty running track that they just like pointed themselves down and off they went.
I think that's a very interesting point, and I think I think if you think about this generation and the fact that we were some of the last folks that grew up, at least for a period of time, without the internet, and we will also, we will soon be one of the last people that grew up without any social media. I think the self-awareness that social media creates a certain type of self-awareness, I feel. I don't know whether it's kind of a desperate need for not necessarily praise, but for reinforcement. And I wonder sometimes how that then translates into the artistic or the creative process. I feel like there's not enough of a combination of tortured soul meets, pissed off kid meets a guy that doesn't give a shit and is just going to do, play whatever he wants to play. For them to kind of, for a lot of the modern bands to put out something that's on a par with a feeling that those older records captured.
Yeah, like, I think, one of the eternal sort of like struggles that people have is like, psychologically, who am I? What am I? The ego is constantly searching for signifiers in order to, say it exists, and what it is. And art used to be awesome for that before. Like, it used to be people saying what I am, or like, this is how I feel, or it could even be sort of like just an ego just kind of lashing out electricity in every direction, kind of thing. But these days, like, you can sort of get that self-actualization, probably isn't a good word for it, but you can get that sense of self, online and easily, without sacrifice or effort, or even, putting anything out more than just like a string of characters together. And, that, don't want to be too judgmental, but I think when you lose that sort of like the element of struggle to be able to get your skills, or effort to put something out, and you're constantly getting that self-actualization elsewhere, like, there's a real need that's then satisfied, and you've got this sort of like bloated fast food sort of, muse. I use that a lot these days because I'm on the coffee at the moment, but you just get that sort of like sitting on the couch, like already satisfied without that real burn. I think that you need to be able to like go the extra step to make something legit. I've got a million theories about all this.
Dude,
like,
I think you've hit on something that's very, very true. And actually, as you were kind of mentioning it, I think the self-actualization that you spoke about, which I feel a lot of folks, and I mean, I'm very conscious of this because I've got a 6-year-old daughter. I was talking to my girlfriend about it the other day, and I said, I don't give a shit if she's left out, she feels left out from everybody at school, but I don't want her having a phone until it's absolutely vitally necessary. And even if she does have one, she's not sitting on the phone all the time. I don't want any of that. I don't want any of that bred into her. I don't care where the rest of society goes, but I just think it's unbelievably unhealthy. But actually, the self-actualization piece, I think you hit the nail on the head around. They're not actually experiencing real self-actualization, but what they're experiencing is the illusion of self-actualization, and they're experiencing it through this kind of this hack they think they've stumbled onto, this fast food fix, where when you and I were young, if, say, for example, I'll use a martial arts example because I did Thai boxing for a period of time, and I remember, when you have a sparring session or you have a class, every single class you're expected to bring your best, and if you don't, you know you're going to leave with a couple of bruises, and in your mind, if you're of a competitive mindset, you're going to lose a bit of respect from the rest of the people in the class. So it pushes you every single time. I think it's true of a musician as well. If you're you'll be able to talk to this more than I certainly could, but if you're a musician with any degree of competition or drive or hunger in them, if you're on a tour with 3-4 great bands, and the band that came on before you or the band that comes on after you rips it up, and you gave an 80% show, you're going to feel like an asshole afterwards. But again, I feel like that hunger has almost been taken out of these kids, based on the fact that nowadays you can just write some stupid tweet, or even worse, post a meme, and then you get 200 likes, and it's like, I'm great. In your mind, you kind of you sort of embrace this role of the folk hero, but actually you've done absolutely nothing to deserve it.
Yeah. Look, and I totally get it as well. Like, if we get a whole bunch of followers on Twitter or something like that overnight, if I post something particularly offensive or ridiculous, like I get that little squirt of like, yeah, we did it, kind of thing. And yeah. if we get some good numbers for a video, again, like, I totally get that too. I forget where I was going to go with all of that, but
I think we've probably sort of flown over about 500 different topics and theories there in one go.
That's right. I think it's come back now. I think it's there's still sort of like sacrifice and effort there. Like one of the things I do notice about modern day metal is like the skills are unbelievable these days. Like the things that people are able to do are incredible. I grew up in the day where Morbid Angels, Blessed Are the Sick was like the standard for, incredible musicianship. And now there's hundreds of people who can just, do Trey's riffing or like Pete's drumming. Whereas
there's 12-year-old Chinese girls pitching up on YouTube doing When Satan Rules His World.
I think they did Immortal Rights as well, and like that warms the heart.
I think the same girl did Immortal Rights, When Satan Rules His World. I think she did Kill the Christian as well, and like does it really, really well too.
And is she the one with that little sister, like who can't play as well as her, but loves doing the vocals, and she's got the eye of the tiger kind of, I love that. So just like I think they're great. The musicianship out there is fantastic. Like what people are able to do is great. The tools that they've got, they can do anything and like make it sound however they want. But there's almost this like mindset of being correct, of like I've got to get this right, whether it's the riffing, whether it's the sound, or whether it's like the genre signifiers that they're dropping, and we've given up plenty of reasons why, but the people who just kind of like have that wild guy instinct just to run in the opposite direction and like do something utterly different, that just kind of will get up the nose of everyone. I think metal has that like get up people's nose kind of like vibe to it, which is very important. And that's kind of gone. Like it's definitely really weird to see conversations out there these days about like, how do we make metal more accepting or more less abrasive?
Don't get me started on that. It makes me fucking sick. And I mean, I don't want to be, I'm not saying that a metal show needs to be a festival of hate and everybody needs to treat each other like assholes. But
it's like having the conversation. How can we make like death by pistol shot to the head less harmful? It's kind of like you're all missing the point here.
No, well, we're both from Southern Hemisphere countries. It's like it's to me exactly the same as people. How can we make rugby safer? I don't want it to be safer. I want people to get fucked up when they play it.
It's not supposed to be safe, and people do it like not for gratuitous thing like getting your eyeball ripped out, but it's there for like the people who go in there have that urge to transgress their own safety, their own physical safety, and see what they can do. Like our DNA is still like fucking old, man. Like,
Yeah.
it's still kind of waiting for like to, chuck a spear into a mammoth or like go without eating for 2 weeks because like we ate all the beans like right in the vicinity. It's wired for that. It needs, for a lot of us, it needs that. It needs some expression of it. So like music is the same. I think it needs some expression. Like most art, it needs some expression of like, here's a taboo. Now we're going to just like get our fingers right in there and like mess it around and sniff it a bit. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it is the toddler who will play with their own shit in the potty. Like, and it's probably unhealthy if everyone's doing it, but someone's got to do it. Like,
Yeah.
it's
there needs to be an element of danger to metal. I feel like without it, and I think we've spoken a bit about like modern death metal. I think there's a lot of modern black metal that's incredibly good. I mean, for me, like black metal right now is one of the most exciting genres on the planet. There's so much that comes out that's great, and I feel like the weirdos that are attracted to playing that style seem to have embraced far more of those old principles, the root principles that's what's kind of driving them to success. But I do think there needs to be, I want to feel like a degree of danger. I want to feel that suspense. Like I remember when I heard Once Upon a Cross for the first time, you hear the wind blow and, you hear Jesus go, Father, why have you forsaken me? It's like, and you're almost like slightly nervous. It's like, God, should I really be listening to this? Is anything am I going to be struck down by lightning listening to this? But it's like, it's this unbelievable thrill. And I mean, there's no way that anyone's going to convince me that you can get that from, a dozen bands who shall remain nameless, but who are kind of seen as the leading lights of modern death metal.
Yeah. It's funny. Like I'm looking around, and I can hear some good riffs and like some good vibe. Most of the stuff I listen to like is just still from like the early 2000s or the 90s. And I really don't know if that's just because I'm an old bastard now. Like I'm 45 years old. I'm not sure if it's because of that or if it's because of they've just, they've lost it. They've lost that essential spark kind of thing. But, I must admit at the same time, like, it's not like I'm listening to hard rock or black metal. Like particularly there's only tiny bits of that I'll listen to. Quite often these days when I'm listening to music, it's chill out or yoga meditation music or stuff like that.
I was going to ask you. So you mentioned on your critically acclaimed New Year's post on Facebook that you've done 250 yoga classes you had done 250 yoga classes in 2020. So how long have you been
spread out over 2 years?
2 years. Okay. I thought that was kind of shoved in because firstly, that's dedication. But secondly, how long have you been doing yoga for and kind of what made you take it up?
2.5 years. Taking a little break from it at the moment because I've sold my flat, which was I live in Adelaide in South Australia, and I was living in the middle of the city, and the yoga studio I used was right next to the flat. So I could really like live there and rack up the hours. But I've moved like a bit of distance away now. So sort of like just bunking in with the missus and her daughters until find the next place, which will hopefully be near a yoga studio. But I started on that. Look, to be honest, I sort of always struggled with depression as an adult, like most guys. And it kind of sucked to be productive for like about half the year. And then the second half of the year, just be struggling to get out of bed or, to get anything done or just like sitting there with the SADs. And the funny thing is I'm into transhumanism as well. So I'm sold on the idea of living to 150 or 200. And it was like really strange to simultaneously live with the urge of like wanting to live that long, whereas also not really caring if I was going to pass away that weekend. So all a bit dramatic, but I had tried everything like for years, all sorts of therapy or diets or whatnot. And some things kind of like would chip away and have a little bit of an effect, but I had I go to raves a lot. I go to doofs, and I've got quite a few of those sort of friends. And quite a few of them who are tremendously well balanced, and like I really respect, you know, said to me, for fuck's sake, just go get yourself to a yoga class already. And like, I'm like everyone, when they hear the word yoga, it's just like, oh, I don't want to be one of those people. Yeah.
Yeah. You
And
still eat meat, I hope.
oh fuck yeah. Yeah.
Can't not eat meat.
Mate, I eat meat, sushi, shellfish, unwary household pets, small children, like it all goes down the hatch. In fact, after this, I've got to make like a shellfish stock.
There you go.
But yeah, but anyway, so yeah, I think I got to probably would have been 2018 or so. And I had a New Year's resolution, you know, that was forced on me by my friends who I was able to do it with. And that was, you're going to try yoga. You're going to go get like a month unlimited pass. And, you know, I think one of the phrases that stuck out was, they were like, yeah, go get a month unlimited pass for a class or studio, go every day. And if you're still feeling wonky or shitty at the end of that month, like if you've still got the depression, then there's nothing we can do for you.
Yeah. We wash our hands of you.
No pressure. Yeah. So I got to about halfway through 2018, and I saw my local studio like had a board out, and so I kind of went up there just going, oh god, this is going to be awkward. I'm going to be the only guy up there, and like this big building full of like, you know, women wearing, you know, yoga pants. And like,
I thought that was the reason why you went.
Well, it turned into a side benefit. Like,
is that where you met your girlfriend?
No, surprisingly enough, met her through an extremely intelligent Polish researcher. But that's another story.
I was about to say who you hired to find you find your girlfriend.
No, like it was funny. Like yeah, the people who do yoga, like quite often I'd be one of like about 3 guys in the class. And I was made to feel welcome like right from the get-go. So there was none of that awkward sort of feeling. And yeah, it is quite often these gorgeous women, you know, looking amazing, can do things with their bodies that are just like out of this world. But it was really funny very quickly whenever I stepped in the studio, that kind of like predatory male sort of like, yeah, look at all these chicks. Yeah, thing just whoop, kind of switched off.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that went down like practicing it, which, you know, I don't have an easy explanation for it. But long story short, yeah, I hit it hard for a month. And I think after even the first class, I went home after that and I had a sleep that night, you know, better than I'd had for years, for decades. And within probably within 6 months, a lot of like long-term trauma and upsets had been well and truly worked out. And shit, when that happens, just a lot of your life just like falls into place, and you know, good things start happening, and that's the way it's been since. So yeah, I kind of swear by yoga. Quite often when I've got, you know, there's a lot of people around these days who are sort of like, you know, I've got a problem with anxiety, and I did as well. Like, you know, I had, you know, what could be termed a very mild breakdown, probably 2016. And for those people, I'm kind of like, get yourself to class. Like you have a room full of people usually going through something similar. And all they're just kind of like heal and get themselves together. Death metal.
Well, so I asked about yoga because I had for quite a period of time when I was competing in Thai boxing, I actually wanted to start doing it, partly because I've just never been the most flexible person, and I kind of figured, okay, maybe that's something that I could do to, you know, get an extra workout in, because at the time I was working out like crazy. Like, you know, I would do weights 5 days a week. I would have 7 Thai boxing sessions, of which 3 were hard sparring and 4 were pads. So I thought, okay, well, I don't do anything on a Saturday. I could go and do yoga. And I just kind of, it got to the point where on a Saturday morning, I was so tired, I just never did it. But I always, it's been something I've been thinking about again recently, because obviously with the lockdowns and stuff, the gyms are shut, so I can't go and lift weights. You know, I can't go, I don't have a heavy bag to hit. Yeah, I've finally now relented and picked up a set of resistance bands, which I'm getting a surprisingly decent workout from. But you know, I'm also 41, and I start to get these, I would say, morbid fears of dying young. I mean, my girlfriend is quite significantly younger than I am. You know, so I you know, if I'm speaking very frankly now, I this is probably the most honest I've been on the podcast. But I feel like I have a responsibility to her to make sure that I stay healthy for a long period of time. My dad has got extremely severe diabetes. He went blind from it. You know, it's a fucking catastrophe. So I have that vision in the back, you know, all the time of, okay, you know, you have the genes for you to be susceptible to this. And so anyway, so yoga has been something that has crossed my mind to start doing recently. And so when I saw you did it, I was quite interested to know kind of what the benefits have been, you know, what you've seen so far. You've done a pretty good job of selling it.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's future. It's kind of like age proofing your body a bit. It's probably the most, when you do heated movement yoga like Hatha Vinyasa, it's kind of like probably one of the hardest workouts that you can do without really putting yourself out there for injury. I'd always finish those classes just in a pool of my own sweat. So it is really good for that. If you're doing any other sports or anything like that, I think as you get older, you have to start doing it. You're in your 40s, and like getting old is not for sissies, that's for sure. And one of the things that, you know, happens is that your muscles start, as you age, they start shrinking. And you know, you've got to keep them flexible. You've got to sort of like keep them strong, and you have to start learning to look after like bits of your body which are starting to like grind down and wear and tear a little bit. And you know, your hips are a main one, so they do a lot of hip strengthening exercises and things like that. They're just really good, particularly when you're when you're on the cusp of aging. And the other thing as well is that I've given the psychological benefits, but I remember in my early 40s, like you get that big hit of like, oh fuck, it's all over. Like, here I go. I'm getting old now. Yeah.
So what I have done is I have thought to myself, all right, 70, 75, that's reasonable. People on my mom's side tend to live very, you know, we had, my mom had an aunt who was 81 and still driving fucking ambulances. So I've got longevity on that side. On my dad's side, disaster. So, but then you do start thinking, Jesus Christ, 30 years. I mean, that's not a lot. And then you start becoming like George Costanza on Seinfeld, like anything that goes wrong. You know, that episode where he's constantly going like, Lupus, is it lupus? It's like, you start to worry about anything like, you know, okay, oh my God, I felt something on my face. It's not been there before.
And you just kind of like, I think it's actually it's a real big kind of almost like oil well of just like fear and anxiety, and you got to find a way to like lance it and like let that shit out a bit. As guys, we don't tend to see it's there until it just fucking pops off and blows everywhere. So it's a good way of slowly addressing that. I also think we'll be living probably longer than like 75, you know, for a lot of us these days. Just
well, one thing that I do know is, I mean, like I went to a doctor about 2-3 years ago, and the one thing that he said to me is, he said, you know, when it comes to, you know, testosterone levels and stuff, he says, keep on measuring what you're doing at the gym. He says, when it starts dropping, you know your testosterone levels are dropping. So far, so good. I have said, if if it ever gets to a point where I start feeling physically weaker than I felt 5 years ago, I will. I've already found the clinic that will do it. I will say, what's the most amount of testosterone you can legally inject into me, and just go for it. I want my veins literally like bulging out like the Incredible Hulk couldn't have done. Yeah.
You'll be like Schwarzenegger talking about the pump.
Oh, fuck yes.
Blood,
I mean,
the blood flows into the muscles, and it feels like I'm coming in the gym.
I was about to say, it feels like I'm having an orgasm. He still looks fucking great for a guy of his age. I mean, I think Sylvester Stallone looks a little better, but Sylvester Stallone probably supplements a little more.
I was going to supplements. Holy fuck! Like, I used to work at Crown Plaza, like, which is the casino hotel in Melbourne, like years back, and he came over with his entourage and shit. And he was up in one of the penthouses. He got raided, like, by the cops. For all this shit. And they were chucking it off the balcony.
They were filming Rambo 4, and I mean, he was shredded in that movie. Yeah. He was like 68 years old.
He looks like you remember those bulls that like Hitler was trying to resurrect? What was it, the Aurelian like bulls? Those ones which were just fucking all veins and muscle and like buttocks that you could probably shoot with cannons and it just bounce off, and they were just fucking mental as well. They wanted to kill everything. He sort of looked like the human version of that.
Yeah. No, but I as I say, I do still look at him sometimes though, and like when I watched Rambo 4, I was like, he doesn't look bad for his age. Maybe that's what I can shoot for. I have I mean, I do take quite a few supplements, and I've kind of tried to tailor my supplements to my age. So I take Tribulus and I take a lot of vitamin D, which I keenly attribute to. I think the biggest thing for me, so I again, in the spirit of sharing, in 2015, I separated from my wife, who I have my daughter with, and it was, I mean, I went through a fucking tough time for probably a good kind of 2-3 years, where you kind of you're sort of pissed off at yourself about what happened, and you're going over things in your mind. I had, massive insomnia and things like that, and I think for me, the key to getting out of it was eventually finding an anchor. The anchor was, I need to be a good dad, and I had to tie in specific actions into that anchor, into being a good dad. And then those anchors were, I need to spend quality time with my daughter. I need to make sure that I kick ass at work, and I need to take care of myself physically. And I slowed down on the booze. I started supplementing properly. I started making sure that I was less lazy about going to the gym, and that pretty significantly changed things for me. I started, when I started supplementing properly, I started getting the right amount of vitamin D in. I started drinking zinc and magnesium supplements. I started sleeping well. I mean, my fucking insomnia was so off the scale before that, it was ridiculous. But I definitely would say I feel like a lot of I mean, I don't really have any aches or pains. I can still deadlift a huge amount. I can bench press a lot. I do think a lot of that is down to supplementing. I never really I was never really into drugs, never really drank a huge amount. I've never smoked. So that I am fortunate about. Yeah.
Oh, look, it didn't really, the aches and pains don't really start up these days to the mid-40s, unfortunately. But I think there's also one other important thing as well, which is it's good to aim for longevity, and it's good to aim for health as well. But for me, the kind of like the final piece of the puzzle was also accepting now that I was in my 40s. So it turned into like exercising and health tailored for the age I was at, and not trying to like, go at it like I was still 19 or 20. I had to like, that was a tricky hurdle for me, like accepting that, in this new stage of life where it's not all about like physical feats and fireworks anymore. It's about like it's foundation.
It's not about
time.
Proving your dominance.
Establishing dominance.
Establishing dominance. I was going to ask you. So I think I can't remember whether I shared this theory with Matt, but it's something I've always wanted to ask you, because I've always been a fan of your vocals. Going back to
you're going to ask about hip hop.
Yes, I am. So okay, just Have you been in any way influenced by hip hop in the way that you phrase your vocals, or in the timing or the rhythmic delivery of your vocals? Because you have a very distinct way of vocaling, and the only person I can think of that's similar, or that I feel is similarly skilled at that, is Glenn. Or Glenn
All right, cool.
Benton. So I'd say, for me, one of the greatest death metal vocal performances ever is on that first Deicide record, but part of it is in the way that he injects rhythm into his voice, and his voice becomes like part of the hook. In the same way that, with some of the best hip hop that's ever been made, the vocal is the hook. And I think you are exceptionally good at that.
No, cheers. It's one of the things I think metal forgets about a lot, and that is, for most people out there, if you're not a musician, then the vocal is what you're listening to, and the vocal is the hook. And it tends to, in normal music, provide like about 80% of like the listening satisfaction. Like, quite often when you see people sort of like humming along to their favorite song, normals, you'll quite
Civilians.
often they're not there going, humming riffs. They're sort of like, they're just kind of like going, my humps, my lovely lady. They're wanting to mouth some words. So I think metal quite often just does like, especially extreme metal, it does like the vocals almost as a throwaway kind of thing. And I really, this is the old man, like, hating rain clouds thing coming out. I really hate that, the guttural slam shit. Like,
I can't stand it. The fucking pig squeals and like the it sounds like you're swallowing your tongue kind of thing. It just sounds so shit.
It was amazing years ago when maybe Disgorge did it, or even Will Mortician like did it for the first time. Like, the first time I heard someone go, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
But I only needed to hear it once, and I didn't need to hear another fucking few thousand bands like just doing it out of time, all through it. Glenn Benton is probably like more of the vocal influence than hip hop, even though I listen to a lot of hip hop. I think he's so underrated. He comes across as such like a fucking caveman lunatic, but his vocal rhythms, like, and I actually reckon it's on Legion that his vocal rhythms are just like utterly next level. His rhythms are catchy. Dead But Dreaming, like that verse like thing, it's so good and it's catchy. And quite often when I'm working out a vocal line, I'm working out the rhythm of it. And then in true metal style, the lyrics come second. Like, then I'm trying to like work out the words that fit that. So I know Metallica used to do that old school as well when they were demoing up tracks. Like James would just be like going na 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 kind of thing. So yeah, it's a little bit similar to that. Having said that, I actually listened to hip hop before metal, and that was kind of like my entry point to metal, because at that stage it was the only other music I knew that would piss off people.
Yeah.
Until I found the rich fields of like extreme metal. But like the first, like most guys my age, first band was NWA. Who I listened to because just they were so hilariously offensive. And then from that I got into Public Enemy. And then that's
and Chuck D, by the way, is a master at vocal rhythm. Some of those early Public Enemy tracks, the way that he manages his voice and his timing it's extraordinary too. I mean, I'm blown away every time I listen to Welcome to the Terrordome or something like that.
Oh yeah, and Night of the Living Bassheads, like not just the performance in that, but there's a lot of chaos in the music as well. Like they keep on cutting out during Night of the Living Bassheads for just kind of like an announcement or like someone yelling something righteous or like, and I really like just how he could be so focused and doing this complex rhythm, and then they just like loop you up a bit and then put you back into it. So that's where I sort of probably started first enjoying that kind of like that sort of type performance. And I do love Brother's Gonna Work It Out, that Prince guitar line in the background as well. Again, chaos and just like this militaristic beat. So the seeds are probably getting sown for, a complex but rhythmical vocal performance there. And from there, like, then I heard Busta Rhymes and I tapped out. Like, he's amazing, but like, there's no way. Well, I guess the guy from Archspire now is doing like an equivalent death metal version of like what that vocal performance would be. It's beyond me.
The machine gun rap that he does.
Yeah, he did that song with Janet Jackson, What's It Gonna Be? And the flow in that's fucked up. It's so good. But moving on from that, like, there's probably another vocal influence as well. Like, there was a Melbourne band like back in the day called Damaged, where they're Australian legends, and their vocalist also had a very rhythmic style. And so pretty much the early influences for metal for me were the guys where the voice was a rhythm. It was like another drum that you banged sort of like in time. It wasn't just like fucking firebombing the entire track with your gurgle. Like, I always got into, the more rhythmic guys than Chris Barnes, for instance. I always thought, Cannibal Corpse, early Cannibal Corpse is great, except for this monotonal schmuck, like just over the top of everything. I was like, what's that about?
And he's I mean, I've ripped on him before on the show, but his vocals now are fucking atrocious. I mean,
you've heard the new 6 Feet Under.
Jesus, it's bad. Oh my god, it's fucking abysmal.
Oh, but, you want to know the funny thing? I had voice surgery last year. I had a little wart like sort of growing on my vocal folds, so it got to the stage where I couldn't speak anymore. And
holy shit! And was that just from vocaling?
Nah, it was probably from nefarious sexual adventures when I was younger. But like, that's what the doc told me anyway. He goes, look, we don't know how people get this. Just 1 in 10,000 do, but this is the going theory at the moment. I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, I went in for surgery on that, and so I was probably a little bit more nervous than people would normally be, just because my vocals are my vocals, and I've spent years building up sort of calluses on them so I can do that hideous vocal performance I tend to do. But I wasn't sure, like, they were going to go in, they're going to remove the wart and fix my voice. I didn't know if that meant I was going to come out and still be able to do death metal vocals again. And while I was healing up and sort of getting back to metal vocal stage, and sort of like I had some conversations with Matt where I was just like, oh, the voice isn't quite back yet. I don't know how long this is going to take or if I'm going to get there. And I remember he played me the new 6 Feet Under, and he goes, look, however bad it is, it's not going to be as bad as that.
Yeah, no, it's so just so I know, so the surgery, was that done before or after the recording of the Werewolves records?
It was done after.
Oh, done after. Yeah. So I had it in my head. I just wanted to make sure I didn't misunderstand.
When I walked in, I was going to say, so I'll make it totally clear. When I walked in to do the vocals for What a Time to Be Alive, my voice was so fucked I had trouble speaking.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be able to do a lot more stuff on the next album.
Yeah. And you've obviously been working on Antichrist Imperium as well.
Yes. In fact, I think for me, like, most of the work was done actually last year, before we did the second Werewolves album. So for a guy whose voice was fucked, I spent a lot of the time in the studio last year yelling my guts out.
I was just about to say, like, it's you were very productive considering what was going on with your health.
Yeah. I was going to say, in the first Werewolves album, like, we did that. I got vertigo, so I was getting dizzy, falling over and spewing randomly. And that was the same time that I was dog sitting for a friend, and I'd moved over to their place. And at the same time, I'm working out how to Airbnb my apartment for the first time, and putting in heaps of OT at work. So in the midst of all this just fucking mayhem, Matt's walked in and gone, "Want to do a band?" quickly. Want to do an album? I was like, yeah, sure. Banged that out like in the middle of all that. So hopefully, when the other guys have almost finished doing their parts for the next Werewolves album. So yeah, hopefully the next time I go in to do my shit, like it's under happier circumstances. But But back to Antichrist. I did my vocals for that back near the start of the year. In fact, it was in March, and it was just as COVID had really got away from everyone, and really broken loose and really kicked off in Australia. So like for me, it's a little bit of a different experience doing Antichrist than Werewolves. Like Werewolves, I don't write any of the music, I just do the vocals and bass. So I really keep in my lane there. Antichrist, it's a bit more all in. So like I wrote a few songs for that one. I think Matt's done 4, I've done 3 or something like that. And I do the vocals very mindful that like Sam Loins will come in and he's going to have some cleans or, his style. So it's kind of like pretty much keeping other people in mind and trying to keep things as nebulous as possible so everyone's got options when it's time to edit it in and mix it for the studio.
Yeah.
And it was also a little tricky. Dave hadn't done his drums then and we weren't sure what he was going to do. So like I just had a click track to go to. And we've just got his drums back, so I'll probably be back in there redoing a couple of parts, which are now sort of like out with what he's done.
I have it on good authority that the drumming performance he's delivered for this record is some of the best work he's ever done.
Oh, cool! Look, I was going to say
that's been word on the street.
I haven't listened to it yet. It came through. I think he was up at James Infernal Sea's studio recording it. Takes it come through. They're gone to Matt's like doing editing, but he's got about 5 balls in the air musically at the moment, and that was over the Christmas New Year period. So yeah, we're just at the start of the new year now, so I'm sure like over the next month or so, I'll start hearing some of that.
Have you written any of the songs on volume 1 or 2?
On volume 2, I wrote Sermon of Small Faith, so the final song.
Yeah.
So that was originally going to be a Senseless song. Matt heard it and thought it'd be a good closer, so chucked that in. And I was going to say he made a couple of small changes to it. Like I love that long sort of outro. Like before, that was just like 4 repeats of that riff, and he brought it right out, and it's like ending the song on a really good note. So yeah, like that's been. I didn't write anything on volume 1 though. Like volume 1, my involvement on that was funny actually. I was over in England. I was staying with Matt and his missus. They were still living there at that point, and I was just on holidays there in Europe. And I think they've been trying to find like a vocalist, someone to do the death metal vocals and a bit of screaming. And they'd had a couple of guys who had agreed to it but dropped out, and that was just before I arrived. And Matt was like, "Look, I know you're on holidays. I don't want to spoil your holidays or anything like that, but would you be interested in doing some vocals for Antichrist with me and Dave?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" Especially because it meant going back over to the studio in is it Bedfont? Dave's one, the one where the Akakaka guys rehearse. So
yeah.
We used to like gear up for Berserker tours back when Dave and Matt played with us in that studio, and it's a funny little place. And I was like, hell yeah, it would be great to see Dave. It would be great to go back to that studio and just kind of sniff the air and get the memories. And we just had a really, that was one session. Like basically, we didn't even have songs. The songs were all recorded musically, but there wasn't lyrics written for songs. There was just sheets of lyrics. And it was like all right, here's a song, here's a bit where you need to do deep vocals. And I just like look through it and just kind of go, okay, I'll take these vocals and I'll do them here. So for something which was just so kind of like last minute and jump in and pastiche, like it worked. It worked really well.
But there's also there's great examples of your vocal prowess or your vocal phrasing and rhythms on that record, and actually on volume 2. So Kill for Satan, masterful track. But that verse, like the way your vocals are, and I'm gonna sound like more of a fanboy than I normally would probably on this, but it's partly because both of those albums have been, both years they came out, they were my favorite records of the year. Kill for Satan, I think, masterful. On Ceremonial Suicide Rites on volume 2, there's a bit right when the song really kind of kicks in where you say something that to my ear sounds like, I reveal myself as evil. It is one of the coolest fucking things I've ever heard in my life. It's like, it's on a par with Take Me, Mephistopheles.
One of the things that that I love about like Matt and the English guys is when bands hang out like together for a bit and they kind of like start almost speaking their own little language.
Yeah.
I noticed that they say evil a very specific way. They don't say evil, they say evil, kind of thing. And so that was me trying to like, it was almost like a little in joke. I reveal myself as evil. That particular vocal.
It sounds so cool though. I mean, that's my favorite track on the record, but it's as I said, you that's Sam Bean to me at your absolute finest. It's the same as on Established Dominance, when you say, if you listen, you can hear the squeals from here. Fucking brilliant.
I was going to say that line actually comes from, I live in Adelaide at the moment. The rest of the guys live in Melbourne, and I used to live in Melbourne. And I sort of like, although I've lived in Adelaide since about 2011, I tried moving back to Melbourne in 2016. For about 18 months. Didn't work, couldn't come back here fast enough. And I've got fond memories of the city, and the reality just didn't stack up against it. Now, you probably want something a bit more specific than that. So it was way too expensive to live there. It was way too crowded. There's more people had been flooding into the city, but the infrastructure hadn't kept up. So suddenly it was really hard to go anywhere. And quite often there'd be like about 3 or 4 hours during the day where you can't really travel by car unless you're going in specific directions with traffic. Otherwise you're just not going to go anywhere. So it's a city that was on the verge of like just stopping functioning as far as I was concerned. But I guess the last one, of the most the most controversial one, I found it got a little woolly headed.
You can go ahead and say it, liberal.
I don't think there's anything wrong with liberal. I think at its best, like the impulses driving it are good. But definitely there's a very strong progressive element in Melbourne, which is kind of like detached itself from reality.
Element, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, like, I left England in 2011. Not because I thought that was too progressive, but one of the reasons I left it was like, I've been there through the GFC, and I worked for JP Morgan Chase like during that, and kind of a lot of what I saw then just said, this is a place that is going to, tip over at the hint of a crisis. And I saw kind of the same thing in Melbourne. I was kind of like, this is teetering, this whole thing. And it won't take much of a nudge for this to fall apart, for there to be a large-scale homeless crime issue, which was already starting to be in play. It's going to struggle to feed itself. Like they haven't worked out any energy resilience, so they're in the next 10 years, they're going to start really struggling with that. And yeah, anyway, so back to that line. Again, very progressive, very woke, and they just will get upset over things. And there's almost like an appetite to misunderstand and get upset whenever possible, for whatever reason. And yeah, when I moved back here, like I think there was an election where like the unwoke party got in, the equivalent of your Tories. And
Yeah.
And I was joking with a mate one night that Melbourne was so fucked off at the result that you could almost hear them like squealing all the way from over here. So I just thought it was a good line to put in. I've noticed that also it's popped up a few other times like elsewhere, and I know with the pro-Trump crowd in the US, they often talk about making them libtards squeal, kind of thing. So it's also got that regressive kind of vibe to it as well, which is what we sort of aim for with werewolves.
Yeah, I will be very open and say, I mean, I think this woke nonsense has zero place in metal. It makes me sick every single time I see it, because it's like, this is music that's supposed to be fucking terrifying to your parents and to your neighbors and to, I feel like I have no issue with, I mean, I've got a lot of friends who are very left leaning and very liberal, and I've not got a problem with that whatsoever. And I get on with people like that very, very well. I myself am not. I would say I'm socially.
Some of my best friends are woke.
Yeah, well, not. I wouldn't say woke, but my. Like a lot of folks on the left I get on with quite well. I personally am probably fiscally very conservative. Socially, I don't give a shit. I'm very libertarian. I do whatever you want, just do not do it. Do not break the law, and don't get in my face about it, and don't litter and mess up everything around me. But I think there's a contingent of the woke movement that it's like a religious cult, and it just seems to not want to stop devouring itself. It's like they've kind of gone around the bend now with canceling whatever they could on the fringes, and now it feels like they're almost at a point where they're going to start canceling each other out.
They're already at that point.
Yeah. It's like, they're now actively talking about Asian privilege, and it's like, well, if you come from China, you have you had Asian privilege, and they really sort of drum on these things, and it's almost like their entire existence. You just hinted at it a second ago, but their entire existence is centered around creating crises where there was no problem previously. And I think it's it's an incredibly unhealthy way to live, because you're not going to live in harmony with your neighbor, and you're not going to live in harmony with your fellow man if that's the way that you go about doing things. I think equally there's a degree of the bigotry of low expectations that come into your predominantly white knight type thinking. But again, I think it's the most unhealthy thing for society for these people to be able to run amok and inject their way of thinking into, the corporate dialogue and into every sphere of society. Because I mean, you're in the UK, they've won. We may have a conservative government, but that's in name only.
Yeah. Look, they exist here and can be as insufferable here. As I say, I'm probably old enough to remember the pre-internet days and pre-social media days. And for me, the thing that always astounds me is it is, how loud a ruckus, just a few people can make. And to me, that's all it ever is when those handful of people speak out, or even, to me, when they speak out and type something and put keys fingers to keys, then to me that is someone saying something. When it's retweeted or someone just forwards a hashtag, to me, it's got as much substance as there. So I don't quite often what people call movements or whatever, I don't really see them as that. But again, that might be my age. The woke movement in metal, something controversial. I do rail against it, a bit, but on the other hand, I I think two sort of opposite thoughts at the same time. Like the first one is that metal traditionally, like, is resistant to change. And I think it was at its best in the early 90s when change was getting inflicted on it, like, at a rapid rate, and it was exploding, and every band that came out was vastly different. And, they were going from underground shows to playing in pubs to then going on tours to like theaters. And so I liked it when, Death put out the Human album, and like suddenly lyrics could be about more than just like Satan and death and whatnot.
I was about to say Satan and murder.
Yeah. The two topics. So like on the one hand, I like the idea that that there's an evolution, and I even like the idea that it gets up my nose, like, because despite the music and the works that I've done, like I'm parenting age at the moment, and I'm now establishment. So if it gets up my nose, maybe that's like, the new form of rebelling. But there's also the other side, which is I am old enough to remember when like metal was getting censored, like actually censored, like shops not allowed to carry it, countries banning it, like Germany not allowing like, the new Cannibal Corpse album there. And Tipper Gore and the PMRC. And them actually, and people protesting shows and actually trying to wipe it out. Now, those were fun days, and I kind of miss them a little bit. But the fun thing was that the threat was external.
Yeah.
And so it was a great thing for banding together and like, sort of fighting against kind of thing. Whereas these days, kind of like that threat comes from inside the scene. And it's a little bit of, kind of 1984 in that, like, the greatest harm isn't that which is inflicted like by someone outside, it's the one that you inflict on yourself. And so, I'm kind of, if someone kind of like comes out with a grindcore version of Screwdriver, for instance, I won't be waving that flag.
No.
But at the same time, I do believe that there, as you say, there should be dangerous elements in there that make people go, "Oh fuck, should we be listening to this? Same time, should we be hearing this?"
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, I've always felt like a degree of. I agree with you. Again, it's like you grew up in that era where there was a real kinship in metal, and you could walk past. I mean, still to this day, I'll walk past a person in the street, and you spot a Morbid Angel T-shirt, or you spot a Mayhem T-shirt or something, and you're like, there's like a recognition, like, all right, you're one of us. You move on.
Yeah.
I don't expect people that I supposedly have a kinship with to be protesting a fucking Marduk gig or a Mugwar gig or a Taka gig. I mean, I don't personally think, I know Host has had his issues, but I certainly think that, you're stretching things when you start to say, Mugwar Nazis and, Marduk are Nazis. I've met Morgan many times. The guy is very similar to me, I think, in the way that I view stuff. He's a pretty straightforward and outspoken dude. He's certainly not a Nazi. But again, it's like anything that's remotely dangerous now, it's like you have these elements within your own scene that's now saying that I shouldn't be allowed to listen to this anymore. I shouldn't be allowed to see it. It's like, come on, man. This was the same, as you said, this was the same genre of music that told people to fuck off when they told us we can't listen to Cannibal Corpse, or, even all the way back to Wasp and, Motley Crue and Twisted Sister and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I don't like the idea that we're denying maybe a younger generation that, wonderful experience of listening to something and feeling in peril from it, and then working through it. Like, I'll also say something sort of like maybe slightly controversial in that I don't care if Margit really are Nazis. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, if like he walks on stage like with an SS cap, chucks out a Zig Heil and starts singing about gassing Jews, all right, then that's where I'll draw my line.
I was about to say, then you're like, I'm not so sure about this anymore.
Then I'll be like, settle down. Holy shit. But the idea that we should be cancelling a gig because of what's in someone's head, like we're in a real strange point in history at the moment where we've gone from having no idea like about bands' personal lives or even people's personal lives to now because of the digital world, we've got this perception that we know what's going on. And in fact, like we assist that perception by quite often like tweeting or posting stuff that gives us away, maybe overshares. And as a result of that, like, you know, kind of the human race is like just on the edge of, after centuries of having this illusion of what people are really like, we're finding out what people now are really like.
Yeah. I think
what we
right.
really think. And it's kind of like this terrible moment where we expect better of ourselves, but we're realizing that a significant percentage of the population wanders around going, yeah, I'm happy exterminating. I'm down with like, yeah. I'm down with like, you know, future generations not existing, so I can have like my fun now. Like,
yeah,
you know,
so I could pollute, carry on like I want to.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't give a fuck. You know, people are finding out that that's what a lot of the population thinks, and they're kind of like shocked by it. Those who have had a more realistic maybe upbringing, and you're from South Africa, I'm from Australia, like, and we come from eras we don't have that many illusions. Yeah, we know people can be savages. We know they can be like, you know, it can be bastards, and that history and even recent history has terrible things in it. So yeah, like it's not so much of a surprise. We've already worked through that, and it's just weird to see people doing that as, you know, making a show of working through it as adults and trying to shy away from it. Fuck, that coffee really kicked.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wouldn't listen to somebody that's openly glorifying something that I so vehemently disagree with as fucking Nazism or racism. But I agree with you. You also can't start implying what the person thinks, because I don't know, maybe, you know, the Mortus from Marduk has an interest in the Second World War. So do I. And let's call a spade a spade. So do a lot of golden idols in the scene as well. There's photos of Metallica where they're doing the Nazi salute.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Lemmy, who's, you know, everyone's fucking, you know, metal grandpa. He had an entire fucking room dedicated to Nazi memorabilia.
Yeah, and a Black Mesa. So like, yeah.
I was about to say, so you're telling me it's okay for him to do that, but Mortis from Mayhem isn't allowed to buy Second World War memorabilia?
I know.
That doesn't make sense.
And that's just the stuff we know. Like, you know, for all we know, like Chuck Schuldiner like grew up sort of bashing gays, and that was his thing. Yeah. Like, you know, and maybe like, you know, some of these later songs were kind of like his repentance. You don't know. People as a whole tend to have like gnarly histories and a lot of fucking shit like floating around up there. And if you start like censoring them on their thoughts, what your perception of their thoughts may be, then you're setting a standard that like everyone's going to, you know, crumble under.
It's also when you start judging them based on an assumption of what they're like, based on something like, for example, their politics. The outrage when Tom Araya posted a pro-Trump meme a couple of this was probably about 18 months ago. People fucking lost their minds. It's like, I'm never listening to Slayer again. Always knew it. Nazi, racist. It's like, this is the same dude everyone said is the nicest guy in metal, the sweetest frontman. I've met him. He's a fucking great guy. I follow his wife on social media. She seems pretty great. You know, she seems to be fairly set in her views on the world. But I mean, that doesn't mean that he's a bad person or that she's a bad person.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Like, she's strongly conservative, and very. You know, it's I did laugh a little bit of everyone's kind of like surprise at that. Like, on the one hand, I sort of get what they mean, because I'm no fan of Trump or the pro-Trump crowd, especially what he's doing at the moment. But like, on the other hand, the guy's Catholic. You know, he's Catholic, and he's also, you know, first generation immigrants, and they tend to lean more conservative.
Yeah, especially Cubans.
Yeah, they've got an actual recent history of like a progressive political party that they're escaping. What did you think that they're going to be about? So,
yeah.
I
was about to say,
tend
it's not like they're going to come over from Havana and go, you know what, that socialism business didn't work in Cuba, but I bet if we give it a chance in the States, we're going to nail
maybe
it this time.
maybe we interpreted it wrongly.
Yeah,
something like
and
that.
they are, by the way, you're absolutely right. They are very, very passionate about it. I did keep an eye on both the DNC and the RNC ahead of the elections, and they had a couple of folks from Cuba come and talk at the RNC, and those people are no fans. Socialism.
Yeah, like it will take generations probably before they sort of forget that. That's we kind of forget things that happened 3 months ago, whereas those guys like have dented families, like depending on which side they were on when Castro took over. But yeah, it is kind of annoying to see them all sort of like get so political over there. Just I'm very big about like change, or the interesting stuff is like quite often done by individuals. Yeah, and that sort of like goes for Australia a bit as well. Everyone's talking about like, oh, why isn't the government saving us or making this and that happen? One of my strong memories of the start of COVID last year was that the first lockdowns in Australia didn't like happen because they were government mandated or anything like that. It was actually people started locking down first, and the government got in after that. The government was still telling everyone to go to the footy right up until like even when outbreaks are in the community, they're like, get on the beers, go to the footy. Like the Formula One.
Yeah.
Here's how it kicked off here. The Formula One Grand Prix was happening in Melbourne. And this is, as I say, me in the studio doing Werewolves like album 2. And I remember Lewis, like a few of the Italian team came down with the Pangolins curse, and Lewis Hamilton was like, if they've got it, cancel the fucking event. I'm not driving like that. And he actually like pulled out. And when he pulled out, everyone, I think a couple of other drivers then followed. Then the event got cancelled. Then there was this like fucking gnarly week, like where, because I'm in the music scene, like, or peripheral to that, I saw everyone just like sort of cancelling their events and their tours. And that was before any border shutdown or government lockdown or anything like that. Everyone, could see how it was going. So, yeah, like to see everyone sort of rely on government as the be all or end all, like, it's a little sad just because I was, last year I saw the real shit happen, and it started with like people getting it done. Yeah. Anyway,
I think
there was a little bit of a detour there.
I think the thinking around relying on government, it's to quote a phrase from Alcoholics Anonymous, which I've not attended ever, but it's stinking thinking. This idea, and I have to call him out on this because I'm a huge fan of Napalm Death, and I've met Barney a couple of times. I've always thought he was a really nice guy. We won't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, but I've always thought he was an exceptionally nice guy, and I got on with him really well. But the other day he was quoted as saying, the government need to give people more assistance. I said, thinking to myself, dude, where do you think the money's supposed to come from for this? The UK's debt level now is over 100% of GDP. America's debt level it's out of control. The day that
trillions.
Yeah, exactly. It's 27 trillion now. The day that China, can kind of break the dollar dominance as a reserve currency, they are fucked. Because they are not going to be in a position where they can just print money anymore. When people seem to think that government has this unending pot of money that they just can spoon money out of, it's like they are giving you your own money back. Government produces nothing. They don't sell anything. They don't make any revenue. The very idea that they call it tax revenue is a fallacy. It is the public coffer into which you and I put money so that so that we can be economically active elsewhere. We don't have to clean our own trash and police our own streets and run our own fire brigade, which in many cases we have to as well. But my view, and I think you're probably quite similar to me in that regard, is I'm very much libertarian as far as government is concerned. I feel like government should be almost non-existent. I should not realize, I should barely know about the government in my life. Almost everything that can be done by private companies should be done privately, because they're significantly more efficient. Taxation, government intervention in my life should be absolutely minimal.
Yeah, I must admit, like I was like that. These recent years, my views have gone maybe opposite, if anything.
It's the yoga.
Yeah, actually, a lot of views changed while doing that. It wasn't
my God.
It wasn't anyone saying anything to me, like or planting ideas subliminally in my head, or like background tracks in the yoga music or anything like that.
I
But
think when you were downward facing dog, the yogi came by. Socialism is great. Tax the wealthy.
but I've sort of like seen a few things that just have changed my mind on stuff. One of them has been I used to be very much kind of like, don't get government intervention or more help, because where do you think they'll get the money from? But I've noticed two things. One is like currently Australia's like on a it looks like there will be military conflict with China, or between the US and China, or China and someone, probably one of our allies, in the near future. So defense budget's gone up 20 to 260 billion over the last year, which I think
I keep an eye on those things. I think it's the most they've spent on defense for something like 40 years, something crazy like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, interestingly enough, the most Japan has ever spent on defense since the Second World War in their last round of budget, in their last budget round.
Yeah, they've also just, I think, joined the Five Eyes Alliance as well. So everyone now is like gearing up for a conflict which looks like it will be happening in the next 10 years or so. And I totally get it, and I approve of like that 260 billion thing. Was when they need 260 billion, they managed to make it appear. The other thing as well, during our last election here, for instance, there was sports grants handed out by the incumbent sort of government, which was just pork barreling. They were giving it to every district that they needed to win, and they found, I think it was something insane like 40 million for that. And you can make I still believe government in the right place can make some difference. However, they have this ability to be able to find money to maintain their power, or to get themselves re-elected.
Yeah.
In vast amounts. And then when it comes to sort of like getting stuff done, then they kind of like pull out the line of where are we going to find the money for that? The other thing I've noticed, because most governments in the world have all governments have gone into huge debt, because of the pandemic over the last year. Everyone is now switching to the idea of modern monetary theory, or MMT, or the idea of like non-stop deficits.
Non-stop money creation.
And a lot of that comes from just everyone followed the US lead, followed the US's lead after the GFC in quantitative easing, lowered interest rates and printed money, which when I saw that, I thought it was insane. I was like, how many times over history do you have to see increasing the supply of your currency and just plunging it into the economy like that results in hyperinflation somewhere down the track? And they're like, no, not this time, because we've reduced interest rates to near zero. And I'm like, well, you're taking a lever of like fiscal control away from the government. What happens in the future, like when you have to increase interest rates? And they're like, well, we'll have worked it out by then. They haven't worked it out by then. So, I'm interested to see the massive backflips fiscally that they can do when it matters, and compared to the little pushing a P along a desk kind of like effort they make when it comes to sort of like more pointed funding. The other thing I've seen in Australia is like we've undergone now about 2 decades of privatization, and the services couldn't be worse. And in fact, the amount of the level of corruption that is steeped into those organizations as well is appalling. If they were still under maybe public control, there might still be corruption there, but at least there would be an effort to make it an election issue, make it something people could vote for. Because they're now private companies, unless you want to be a large shareholder, if you've got a spare 10 million, they're not going to listen to you. So it hasn't been effective there. It hasn't given us cheaper services. Australia is a gas exporter, a coal exporter. We've got the highest electricity prices in the world through privatization. We've got problems there. But yeah, it's a weird time. I don't. And one other point as well, I don't think China will economically come out on top of the US. Like, if anyone has been pumping the debt plan harder than anyone else, it's China.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And they've just about at the point now where plunging more debt creates no growth. I think this has been their last. This will be one of their last 3 years of it. So, and depending how the world reacts to them, last year might even be the last year of it. Although the EU's got something different to say about that. I saw that they just signed a large market agreement with China. So, sorry, this is all getting rather high end for
for a podcast about Neanderthal death and black metal. No, but I mean, I could tell you now the demographic of who listens to the show probably just gone, man, this show really got interesting now. Fucking finally, he stopped talking shit for a change. So, so I agree with you on the armed conflict. I think though, but based on everything I know about China and their challenges, I feel like all the Five Eyes need to do is cut off the food supply to China somehow, and they would struggle to. They can't feed themselves domestically. They have to import all their food, or at least a vast chunk of their food.
It's not a good agricultural country. They're getting around the food thing with their fishing fleets at the moment, and their cavalier disregard for countries' territory, or especially fishing territory.
Yeah.
So they've got mass trawlers out at the moment, and I think basically their troubled days will be when countries start coordinating and cutting off their fishing, and then they're fucked. But yeah, there's a lot of ways they can go down. At the moment we've seen Jack Ma has disappeared, and they killed off
I was listening to because one of the things I've actually curtailed my intake of news pretty drastically recently, because I'm just sick of listening to the same old fucking propaganda drivel all day long. But one thing I do listen to religiously every day is Bloomberg Technology, and they were talking about it today. Like, he's just suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth. Said a few things critical about Xi Jinping, and next thing you know, he's gone.
And it's not just been him. I think Ren Jiquan, who was one of the the biggest property developers, he got chucked in jail. The biggest media guy in Hong Kong is continually getting rearrested right now. So it's everyone kind of looks at the history of the 20th century, and I know most guys kind of wonder what they would have been thinking or feeling, or how they would have been reacting when the 1930s was brewing or the 20s was happening or stuff like that. And I'm kind of well, you're actually watching one of the biggest countries in the world right now go full Zig Heil, and this is what it looks like. And this is what your population says, and this is how people react. And this is why things happen as they do. You sort of see the very obvious things happening. You watch the elite getting jailed up. You watch people getting thrown into camps. You watch little proxy wars getting started on borders. You watch a huge ramp up in militarization. You watch a complete disregard for economic fundamentals and the creation of debt. And you just listen to what they're fucking saying, which is get ready for war. I want you guys war ready in the next 3 years. we don't like your country, like you're a bunch of barbarians, you're like garbage people, using language like that. And there is, now I know how you felt like when you were in maybe Poland in the 20s or like early 30s. It's kind of like, I'm hoping that someone gets sane over there, like, quick, that cooler heads prevail, that like, Xi Jinping like just has, gets a fishbone in the throat and no one gives him the Heimlich, like, but like, this is how it feels. You're hoping for the best, and you just see like the worst.
You're hoping. I was about to say you're hoping for the best, but you realize it's probably a good idea to anticipate for the worst. I mean, the thing about conflict with China for me, I made the joke when the news was announced. There's no way Japan bought 120 F-35s to fucking decorate the emperor's lawn. It's kind of that's some serious firepower that you've just bought there.
Yeah, they've got a Whopper Navy as well that's been sitting on the other side of Japan and has been out in the blue water, and like quite a lot of it's, they don't give the location of it where it is at any given point. So Japan's ready. India has finally realized that they can't appease China anymore. Australia, obviously, everyone knows our stance. Southeast Asia is the weak link at the moment. They don't like being coordinated. This is a sweeping generalization to which there's notable exceptions, but there's a reasonably corrupt political class there, which is what China thrives on, dropping that big bag of cash to get their way. And they're getting some of the Pacific Islands on board. That's going to be the weak link. I think they'll use Southeast Asia to wedge. Philippines, that maniac president of theirs, is like, he's stopped hedging and he's gone all in with the US. So it's cool. Vietnam, who are like, I think everyone forgets what a bunch of savages these guys can be. They're very anti-China, and they're making.
I was just about to say they despise China. I mean, they don't like America, but they truly hate China.
Yeah, and they're minting it at the moment, like through basically ripping manufacturing, off China and like bringing into Vietnam. So this is all working out, great for them. But other countries, like I know Cambodia has fallen, like Sri Lanka fucked. Pakistan, well, they're left without any friends, so they've gone in on China. You just get these sort of like countries that are now like sort of wedging. So it's going to be hard to get a coalition in Southeast Asia, which would be like the real game changer, because then that closes off things like the Malacca Strait. The travel of like overland, goods. I could go on about it for ages.
Have you read a book?
It's going to come down to the wire.
Have you read a book called Disunited Nations by Peter Zeihan?
Yeah, love it.
Very good book.
I think there's some fundamental things he gets wrong, but there's also I agree with also a lot of it. I think the things that he gets wrong is that a lot of the big historical movements haven't been like a fait accompli of like geopolitics or demographics. Quite often it's been a black swan event. And with China, I think the military is a bit more problematic than he gives it credit for.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to think that they could be wiped out in a matter of a few afternoons. I feel like and I agree with you. I think he's a little too flippant about about certain things. I think he underestimates the damage that bad culture or a deteriorating culture can do to a country, and frankly, that's what's happening in America right now. Yeah. I mean, when you get insane shit like the guy in the 117th sitting of the House on Sunday evening going "Amen" and "A woman" at the end of prayer. I mean, that's if that's commonplace in government, you're fucked. But I do like the book though. Yeah. I think his analysis, is on a lot of stuff is spot on, and just the insight that he has around countries' relations to countries, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It's essential reading in my view.
Yeah. I think I think China will put up way more of a fight than he seems to think, and the Pentagon has openly expressed that as well. But I also think he's also nailed a lot of the rest of it as well, particularly the economic side, just how over leveraged that they are, and that's not particularly hard to, if you doubt that, it's not particularly hard to read something like the South China Morning Post, and even though that's fairly pro-China, you can see reports of the numerous banks that are running into liquidity issues at the moment. The ones which collapse, like Baoxing, and a lot of the developers going out of business there. The P2P sort of like a loan issue that they've just recently had. It's not too hard to kind of do a few hours reading through that and go, okay, right, he's onto something here. There is a lot of money running dry there, and there's a lot of evidence lying around from that. Like I think he might listen to Kyle Bass a little bit too much.
Jesus, that guy goes fucking, I mean, to borrow an American phrase, he goes hard in the paint on China. He did an interview, I think it was with the Hoover Institution, just like an hour long, just tear into China after COVID-19, which it's very entertaining to listen to. But yeah, if ever there's a man who's no friend of Xi Jinping, it's Carl Bass.
Jesus, yeah. The problem is, in the West, I think he throws a lot of his credibility away by going pro-Trump. You talked before about the effectiveness of the US as a country, and like it can be affected by some crackpot minister, like whether he's going amen and a women, or whether it's like another one who's Republican aligned, like going ha 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 for about 2 minutes straight talking about Joe Biden. It's all various political manifestations of the same mental illness. But like I think their real problem coming up fairly soon is what happens when the country doesn't know who the hell the commander in chief is, because the one who got voted out won't leave office.
Well, you have a real possibility now that I think that the country could, I mean, I think there's one of two things that are a more real possibility than they would have been a couple of years ago. One is the creation of a third party, although I don't think Trump is unifying enough to pull that off successfully. Two is states seceding. And again, frankly, part of me goes, maybe that's the best thing to do. If you look at Texas, Florida, and traditionally red states, and then you look at California, and you look at hard blue states, you go, what do these people actually have in common? In order to have a country, you need to at least have some sort of shared culture, shared values, a level of shared goals or ambitions. I would say, and my American listeners could correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm seeing, I don't see any crossover there. I see two groups of people that really, if we were to characterize this as a marriage, and this was your friends and you were counseling them, you'd say, listen, maybe it's time to go talk to the lawyers.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think again, like the Americans probably can correct me on this one, but NAFTA's got a lot of weight to it. It's the only real good trading block going at the moment, and it means
USMCA now, mate.
Oh, is it? Oh, fuck. All right, the US, is probably one of the better ones going. As they would have to ask themselves if they've, if they secede from the US, does that mean that they have to strike up their own trade agreements like with Mexico and Canada? And whether they're going to do a better job of that on their own than like if they're part of, like, say, the Union. The answer to that would probably be no. And does that also mean that the cheap transport that they've got, like overland, between countries, if suddenly that becomes a bit more expensive when they have to then go out of their own seceded territory into another US state and then again into through another border, financially, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. So I think the only reason a state would secede is if they, we've now seen the power of the crazy, like in government over there, like right at the very top. There's no reason why like a state wouldn't get a little crazy as well, and and go do a crazy move. It would be a crazy move, I think.
And I agree with you. I mean, you think about everything that goes into it. How do you split the military? How do you divide up the debt? How do you, trade agreements, alliances, all of that sort of stuff? It doesn't feel like it would work, that functionally it would ever be conceivable. But I feel like it's more. I wouldn't be. I mean, things have happened over the last couple of years that are so insane. I wouldn't be surprised if we suddenly see it now.
Yeah, it is like when I call Werewolves Album 2 What a Time to Be Alive, like I really had a lot of this shit in my head. It was just kind of like, you know what, I expect to see it all. Like right now, I refuse to be surprised from this year onwards. Like at my country, other countries, at like what people are saying, what people are doing. Yeah. All bets are off.
Yeah, the thing is, my view of the political class is they have one goal, and that's to stay in the earning seat, and they will say whatever they need to. It doesn't matter what side of the fence they're on, and that's why people that this it's not a recent phenomenon, but it's intensified recently, where people are disavowing friends, disavowing family because they have differing political views. To me, it's so insane, because I think to myself, do you think that these people in these modern day tribes that you're so clung to give a fuck about you? They don't care. All they care about is staying in their job. They'll say whatever they need to do to stay in their job, and they want to keep earning money. And no one can logically look at how rich some of these politicians have become, on a career that has been entirely in the public sector, and not go, some things amiss here. The fact that Nancy Pelosi is worth $100 million or however much she's worth doesn't make sense to me. The most she could ever have earned is $300,000 a year.
I don't know too much about that, but I do know that to be any sort of player in the US, you need that bank behind you. So it might just be a case of like anyone who doesn't have bank getting strained out before the political process even starts.
Yeah.
So
Eric Weinstein spoke about this I think yesterday on Twitter, and again, Eric Weinstein's not somebody I would always agree with, but he did make a very good point. And he said one of the things that you can see very clearly with what's happened over the last couple of years is whether you're on the left or the right, whether you're Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, the Washington establishment doesn't want an outsider, and if you're an outsider, they will do everything possible to get rid of you.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I'm not 100% on board with their anti-outsider thing, although I have seen it previously, maybe many years before, and perhaps like someone like Ralph Nader. But I never had a high opinion, say, of Donald Trump. And whenever people generalize and say outsiders, they're talking about Trump. Because he's been, just by the head of the Republican Party, like the top outsider guy. But even before he was in president, even when he was just like launching tweets like at Obama from the sidelines, and I didn't think Obama was like, I think he was particularly negligent as a president. Half of that, the roadblocks put in front of him by Congress, but the other half of it was a disinterest in his allies around the world. I always thought Donald Trump was a con man. I always thought he was a crook. And I didn't think he was. I went online saying before, like he got in as president, I don't think he's fit to be on the local city council, let alone president of like the biggest country in the world. And none of his actions have disabused me of that notion. I don't think I think there was like maybe some Washington establishment. I say this as an Aussie sitting far away who only knows what he reads and sees. But there was like that bit of the establishment that was trying to like take down the outsider and protect party interests. But then I think there's like quite a wedge of them like just going, fuck, this guy's destructive. We are losing our ability to say to to crook countries around the world, you need to behave better. They can just turn around and go, hey, this is what you guys were happy to do under him. Yes, we can claim the elections are false. Yes, we can say Lügenpresse or false media. Now we can, deny and defy
fake
reality.
News.
Yeah. Now we can do all that, and that is because the US has just done that. That's now the legitimate government playbook, even though those are tactics that 5 years ago would have belonged to a tin pot dictatorship. Unfortunately, now that's the stain that has to be worked through. I sort of get establishments not liking the outsider, and I think in Trump they're very, very justified in that.
I think it also comes back, bringing it kind of full circle to your New Year's post around this post-truth era where no one really knows what to believe anymore because news has become such a partisan theater. Where if you watch CNN, you get insane, left wing. If you watch Fox, you get insane partisan Republican. And it's very difficult for most people, I think, to discern what's actually real in all of that smoke, because that's all it ultimately is. I think kind of coming back to my view as politicians as as being one part of one big con game. I feel a lot of the stuff is theater. It's a to use an analogy, it's a smoke bomb to distract us. Whilst they line their pockets and do various other things that they don't want us to know about. It was proven to me. You're in the UK. I remember this was years ago, probably like 2007, 2008. They were talking about scrapping the cap on tuition fees. And I remember this was when the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives had a coalition government. And the idiot from the Liberal Democrats who was, I can't even remember what his position was, but I remember him coming on the news and saying that, the people that were protesting at the time, it's unfounded. The universities are never going to top up their, never going to push it up to, the maximum amount. Anyway, about probably 18 months later, out of the blue, the 7/7 inquiry opens up again. God knows why. It was several years after the fact. It wasn't something that anyone needed to pore over again. You knew it happened. It was tragic. People died, but the inquiries would most certainly have been made after it had happened. Buried way in the back of the newspaper one day, I noticed this tiny little article, and it says 80% of universities in the UK are going to be charging the maximum allowable amount for their tuition annually. And I thought to myself, there you go. I'd learned that in university in public relations. The guy was saying, first thing you learn in public relations in politics is you bury bad news. And I thought to myself, that's exactly what they do. They drum up this theater, and everyone gets wrapped up in it. Whether it's impeachment or whether it's he made this call, he did this, or he did this, or he did this, and in the background all this other crazy shady shit is going on. And that's the thing. I think the one thing that needs to happen is people need to divorce themselves from the media and start relying on, I don't know how you do this, but they're going to need to start relying on their own ability to interpret data to understand what's actually going on.
Yeah. And even data, can get a fudge. I had a guy, a friend who was trying to pitch to me that hydroxychloroquine was actually the cure for COVID. And that was just getting buried by everyone. And he sent me a paper that's apparently asserted that, and it's only when reading through this extremely dense literature that you can find all the various qualifications that were in there, as well as the peer reviews that pointed out the various fallacies that they're operating under, and et cetera, et cetera. So data isn't the cure-all that we once thought it was. And once upon a time, we thought that a good explanation and good data was the cure for bad news or bad actors with bad information. I think that the shock that we've had in the last few years is we've seen that's not necessarily the case. It's actually an identity thing. And just as some people like to identify themselves as more moral, others like to identify themselves as more informed or more realistic. And those identities all have their own blind spots.
Yeah, I think you're right there as well.
My problem is I've probably come from the establishment, if anything. Like for a death metal person, my background is I went to one of the top private schools of Australia, like Prince Charles Boris Johnson kind of joint. And from there, like when I was working in my 20s, I worked at a private club in Melbourne called the Australian Club for a few years, where you're privy to all the government sort of like meetings, conversations that they have between themselves, and also big business there.
At what point during that did you join the Illuminati or the and or the Freemasons?
I haven't. From what I've seen from either of them, like there's not enough to get out of it to make it worthwhile. But from there, like, not long after, I worked for JP Morgan Chase, in the belly of the Great Satan itself. So I kind of come from like a conservative establishment viewpoint, where I largely agree with the information that is put out. And before the last 4 years, I'd usually go with whatever the government said. The things that and those are still my instincts. The things that I struggle with, like, is if you go, I forget if it's Reddit or Wikipedia, but it might be Wikipedia. It's got a list of conspiracy theories that were found out to be actually true. And it's a fucking shocking read for someone like myself to see so many things that you would automatically, because of your backgrounds, like just go, oh, that's bullshit. Find out how actually here's how true it was, and it's now accepted as mainstream, knowledge, like a couple of years later. And it really makes it hard for me to like, I hate QAnon and I hate that crowd. I think they're insane and that they just spout utter shit. But it makes it really fucking hard to say that everything that they say is complete horse shit when Jeffrey Epstein comes out.
Well, dude, so wasn't Alex Jones one of the first people that had been talking about? And I'm not Alex Jones supporter, but was Alex Jones not one of the first people that started talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
I think so. I don't know, but yeah, just when he's fucking hanging himself in his cell on suicide watch, and then Netflix puts out a series putting it out in detail how many governors and state attorneys gave the fucker a free pass. Even with you think that they would screen everyone that presidents and sort of high-end moguls would have contact with, and to find that he's just still chumming it with them, it's kind of holy fuck. Hey, there's only so much that I can explain away. So it's a real weird time for me. Just because that happened doesn't mean I'm then going to go all in on everything else that they say, but it also makes it extremely hard to kill it off as an idea. And that's I think what a lot of people are struggling with at the moment. That's a little bit of doubt can just completely change their worldview and open them up to other information which is easy to disprove. But because that core little, particle of doubt is floating around, it just keeps some crazy ideas alive.
Yeah. Speaking of crazy ideas, and before people think that they've tuned into another episode of Geopolitical Futures, do you know who James Lindsay is?
No.
So he's the guy that wrote a book called Cynical Theories. He did I wanted to find this so that I could actually, so I wouldn't mangle it when I kind of quote it back to you, but he did this this social justice, I don't know, it was social justice hoax, but he did this hoax where he and a couple of other people started writing all these absolutely insane social and gender studies papers that they had peer reviewed and they had accepted by several universities as brilliant. So here's this is a quote from the Wikipedia entry. By the time of the reveal, 4 of their 20 papers had been published, 3 had been accepted but not yet published, 6 had been rejected, and 7 were still under review. Included among the articles that were published were arguments that dogs engage in rape culture and that men could reduce their transphobia by anally penetrating themselves with sex toys, as well as Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf rewritten in feminist language. The first of these had won special recognition from the journal that published it, so the dog rape culture one. And that just, when you mention peer reviews, that demonstrates to you the value of peer reviews. It's mostly fucking lunatics that have never done anything outside of education that peer review stuff. So,
I was going to say I'm peripheral to university and academia. My girlfriend works out at university, and as I come from the conservative side, where I've seen a lot of that, and you see sort of like some crazy positions that are being held and seemingly held in academia. And on top of that, in Australia, like, you also see the abuse of the vice chancellor position with a lot of the communities here, the increasing casualisation of the academic workforce, while university boards are building billion-dollar property assets. And yeah, there's a lot to hate there, but also I don't think they do a good job of publicizing themselves. When you're out there and you're talking to people and you're getting hands into what they're actually doing, there's still a lot of legitimacy to peer review, and there's a lot of people doing amazing work and great minds who have achieved a lot. And it kills me to see them sort of like besmirched by just this fringe element, which again seems to get all the press and all the publicity. It sort of sucks. And again, like, that element of doubt then goes and floats around and delegitimizes like a lot of the amazing work that's done. So yeah, I just had to come to their defense there, just because I know so many people who are fucking brilliant.
And don't misunderstand me. I wasn't generalizing and saying they're all scum of the earth, but my dad actually was a doctor, so his doctorate was in applied sciences. So he's I've kind of seen that process firsthand. I don't know how many of these papers.
It's so funny because you get the hard sciences, like where it's it is like they dot their I's and cross their fucking T's, like, to this insane degree. And then the social sciences, like, just seem to be, it's like, how the fuck did you guys sneak in? Like,
communist propaganda is what it is, mate. Did you ever see, there was a, on the topic of conspiracy theories, there was a guy, I don't know what his name is, I'm going to have to Google it to see, but there was a former KGB agent who was debriefed, and he was on various news channels, but there's one, I think, 2 or 3 hour interview that he did where he spoke about kind of the Soviet strategy for infiltrating the US and kind of for bringing them down. And he was talking about how it starts with academia. And it's been interesting because it was written off at the time as conspiratorial nonsense, but folks who are strongly left-leaning, like James Lindsay, as he's been talking about it for years now too. Part of why he did this hoax was because he wanted to prove it. He does kind of seem to have a point in that some of this poison kind of gets injected at academic level, and then you have these students that go out into the workforce with these insane ideas in their mind, and they then further kind of bring the population to heal, as far as like we said before, you kind of either need to accept these things, or you're an outcast and a pariah and evil, and somebody who probably we would think is a pretty awesome dude or a pretty cool girl. So.
Yeah. There could be something to it. I don't know enough of the history of it. I do know that, like, on most university campuses, you'll find like, your Socialist Alliance, or, it's always been a feature of youth that they'll like go for those ideas. And probably the reason it hasn't been killed off hard is that you take on people who can construct a good sentence and have plenty of spare time, like students tend to do. You take them on at your peril. They'll always be able to like, write a fucking good on, letter to the editor, or like, kick up a stink. You're at the age where the hormones are fucking going. You're either making death metal, or you're making like a fuss about socialism.
Yeah.
Or, that seems to be like, how it goes. So that's probably why those ideas have stuck around sort of like past their use by date. It is, as I say, it is always strange to me to be out there and like see so many fucking brilliant people, and then you get these just like fucking nufties with these dumb ideas, kind of like drifting in amongst them all. It's like fucking hell.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I feel like the modern day society. I've spoken to my friend about this many times too. One of my best friends actually. I said this modern day world can drive you fucking insane if you keep digging into all of these things, and it whether it creates anxiety in you or anger or whatever the case may be. At the end of the day, you do need to pause, and you need to go, I can't control any of this. So what I should be doing is focusing on the good things in life, and whether the good things are family, friends, the fact that you're still healthy, the fact that you have a roof over your head, food on your table, those are the things that you need to remind yourself of every day. And actually, again, bringing it completely full circle, that's why I think there's been such an acceptance and such an embrace of werewolves, because at the end of the day, like you said before, we still have that primal, those primal instincts in us, and folks like you and I, regardless of our differing views on certain things, we still want to hear something that fucking rips our throat out when we listen to when we listen to it. And there's just it's almost like comically angry and hateful, but there's like a release to it, and there's a real feel good factor to hearing it.
Oh man, when you first start listening to death metal or extreme metal, quite often the first response like you have is laughter. Like, where the first time I heard Slayer, I pissed myself. First time I heard Morbid Angel, I laughed my head off. Like, what the fuck is with those vocals? Is that a solo? Like, what's that noise? What's that stupid beat? What the fuck?
I think the most I ever cracked up was listening to the first track on Purification Through Violence by Dying Fetus. It's like, we exist to destroy. It's like, I'd never heard something so heavy as when John Gallagher starts vocaling, because he doesn't even do like the pig squeals. He sounds like a fucking Rottweiler. Yeah, I was about to say, he sounds like an extra of Lord of the Rings. It's incredible. But brother, you've given me way more of your time than I expected. I felt like this was long overdue, and it really has surpassed my expectations by a long shot. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and at some point this year we'll have to do it again.
No worries.
I feel like
there'll be plenty to talk about.
I was about to say, I feel like we could have spoken about a lot more stuff, but take care of yourself, and stay in touch. When, like I said, we'll definitely do one of these again at some point down the road.
Will do. Thank you very much.
All right, dude. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you so much to Sam for coming on the show and just for an absolutely awesome conversation. Like I said, I will definitely get him back on the show without a shadow of a doubt. If you're wondering why we didn't bring up the Capitol riots, it is because we actually recorded this the day before that happened. So probably some of the conversation will have lacked the context of that because clearly it hadn't happened by that point. But I think that's probably one of the reasons why this most certainly merits a sequel. But great guy. And as a reminder, that new Werewolves record, What a Time to Be Alive, is coming out on Prosthetic Records on January the 29th. Check it out. I have heard the whole thing already, and it is fucking crushing. It is, in my view, an early contender for one of the strongest records of 2021. And speaking of which, 2021 is most certainly getting off to a very good start. Thundering Hooves out of London are a duo who have just released a record called Vestiges. Inexplicably, they're unsigned, which again seems to be becoming a trend where really, really great bands just seem to be going under the radar, but no more because they've been featured on the Into the Necrosphere review section. But anyway, Thundering Hooves weaves together elements of doom, traditional heavy metal, thrash. I kind of pick up a couple of whiffs of Slayer on here as well. But all of this is rooted into a blueprint that, in my view, is very much rooted in black metal and black metal aesthetics. And I think if you want to kind of be a little bit more granular about describing them, imagine a hybrid of Mantar and Necrophobic. And you'll start to get an idea of what I'm talking about. The record from start to finish is laden with riffs that are catchier than Corona. The tracks oscillate between slower, mid-tempo grooves and just breakneck, vicious blasting. And one thing that I love in particular about this album is that the production is crystal clear. On my headphones and on my hi-fi at least, the bass guitar in particular really, really stands out, and you can really hear kind of every bass line and every bass rhythm, and I just think that's fantastic. So overall, I think Vestiges is a superb debut by a band who have a shed load of potential, and if any labels are listening, get signing, because I think these guys could be huge. One of my favorite tracks off the album is what I'm about to play next. This is a song called Mara. by Thundering Hooves off a record called Vestiges, released independently for some insane reason. But I think you can find them on Bandcamp. Either way, I'm going to post a link to where you can track these guys down on in the description to this podcast. So do go and give them a look. Another band that you need to give a look, Malakhim. They've just put out a record called Theon on Iron Bonehead Productions. These lads hail from Sweden. They feature members of Nagelfar, The Duskfall, Ancient Wisdom. They've been active since 2016. They put out a demo, an EP, and a live album. But Theon is their official debut full-length. And as you can expect from bands on Iron Bonehead, this is grim, raw, apocalyptic black metal. Definitely not what I would have called standard Swedish fare, but that being said, I kind of feel like there's a bit of a renaissance going on in Sweden at the moment. That new Swartzen record was in my top 20 of 2020. Nordegeist, obviously, I reviewed last week. Feels to me like maybe the Polish scene or the Icelandic scene, something somewhere has awakened or sparked a fire in Sweden, and it certainly seems to have gotten a lot of bands to really step up their game, which is fucking great if you're a fan of black metal. You're definitely going to be a fan of this album. The songs are really, really well written from start to finish. I think particularly strong on this album, the vocalist E has just the most incredible range in his voice. He kind of goes from growling to screams to these really, really cool, just hateful mid-tempo shouts. And he basically carries on throughout the record like somebody cussed his mama, and does so to very, very good effect. This is one of my favorite tracks off of Theon. This song is called Chalice of Ruin.
With thunder
Chalice of Ruin by Malakhim off a record called Theon, available right now on Iron Bonehead Productions. If you like that track, you're going to like the rest of the album, so make sure that you check it out. And if you do go to their Bandcamp and you buy yourself some of their shit, then let them know that it was old Jackson at Into the Necrosphere that sent you. No news this week. I kind of felt like Sam and I had gone on about politics and about the news for more than enough to satisfy my craving to talk about that sort of thing. But I'll probably do another one next week. Now, on the topic of next week, I did say that I was going to announce who the guest was for episode 64, and it is none other than Johnny Kelly, the drummer of Typo Negative. He also drummed for Danzig. He drums for a band called Silvertomb at the moment. I am a absolutely massive Typo Negative fan. I always have been. And it was just such a pleasure talking to him. This is another long one, so we went about an hour and a half, spoke at length about how he got into the music business, sort of how he became a musician, and his experiences of being in Typo Negative. We kind of spoke about a lot, as well as his experiences of working with Danzig. If you're a Typo Negative fan, you're definitely going to want to check out this episode. And even if you're not, he's just such a great guy, and it was just such a fun conversation to have. I think you guys are all really going to enjoy it. What else will happen next week? I'm not really sure what I'm going to review yet, but it kind of feels like the momentum is starting to pick up already. Normally, like every year, it's sort of there's always a bit of a lag until about April, and then around April is when all the good shit starts coming out. But I feel like this year we're getting started a little bit earlier, most likely because so many people have been sat at home twiddling their thumbs, for the last 9 months. We're back to lockdown here in the UK. I hear now that they're talking about making the rules more strict, including the fact that apparently you're not, one of the ideas that's going around that they're mulling at the moment is that you're not allowed to talk to people in supermarkets anymore. Which it goes from fucking dumb to just certifiably stupid. But that seems to be the whole world at the moment, and that's why it's so refreshing to have a conversation with somebody like Sam and to go, we can be on opposite ends of the spectrum on a few things. Although I think maybe opposite of the ends of the spectrum is a pretty strong word in this example. But you know what I mean. We can have differences. But we can end the conversation, on a civil note, and we can be friends. I often have said, and when I spoke to Brock from Panzerfaust, it was the same thing. I'm happy talking to people that differ from me completely. I'm happy and interested and keen to hear their point of view on stuff. And I know that some of the things that I've said on this show, not all of you guys will agree with. And a lot of things that I see people say, I don't necessarily agree with either. But at the end of the day, we all have to share this planet, and we need to figure out a way to get along with each other. And I think the first step to doing that is to stop for a moment and acknowledge the fact that maybe you're not right about everything. And I all fingers are pointing at me when I say that. And I really have tried my best, particularly over the last couple of years. To just take a pause for the cause, and I think acknowledge that I definitely don't have all the answers, and it's kind of like it is that saying of the more you know, the less you know, and that's kind of how I feel. So anytime I have a conversation like this, it's awesome. It really, really hypes me up, and I hope that it did you too. I hope that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, whether you're listening to this on the day that it comes out or over the weekend or 5 years from now, you're safe and you're healthy. Hope the world is still standing by the time you listen to this. From the mean streets of Great Shefford, I am wishing all of you die-hard, bad motherfuckers a fond farewell.